All right, Steve, is this the morning show America needed? Three guys on a couch here at the ACC meetings?
Yeah, I'm not sure this is going to drive your ratings, but I appreciate being here. It's always good to see you guys. Unfortunately, on this rainy morning, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, it didn't work out quite like we planned, but hey, that's college sports, and I think you've learned that in the last year, right? You've had this runway now, working with Bubba Cunningham, the athletic director in waiting of sorts. And now you're talking with everybody in college football and college basketball, college sports here in Florida. Do you feel ready to take this on?
You know, I hope so. I mean, I think, I've been fortunate in a couple components in that I grew up in Chapel Hill, so had that background, was in college sports before I made my way into professional sports and NASCAR. And then I do think that the system that Bubba and I concocted about how we would do a transition has served both Bubba and myself well, but more importantly, it was the best thing for UNC athletics. And so I think being able to work alongside Bubba for the last 10 months has been particularly beneficial. He's obviously one of the most respected athletic directors in the country and has had an amazing run. He's navigated a lot of difficult situations, both at Carolina and some of his previous stops. And then I think, as we all know, the last 9 months have presented no shortages of other challenges and new opportunities within the collegiate athletic space.
This is your first time at these meetings, specifically the ACC meetings. You've gotten to talk to a lot of people. Has there been a takeaway for you of kind of the state of college sports or the state of the ACC?
I think it's just impressive when you go into a room and they're all the women's basketball coaches or the men's basketball coaches or the football coaches, and you just see how much talent is in this conference. And I think sometimes we don't fully step back and look at the full suite of who's leading our programs and just how accomplished they are. And so I think that's been a lot of fun. And there's no doubt, though, that you're here. We have a lot of meetings with the ADs, and there's a great collegiality, but there's still an underlying competitiveness. I mean, we're in the business of trying to beat, those who we go against and those who we compete against. And so that's still there. But I do appreciate what Commissioner Phillips has done in the sense that they're really robust and open dialogues, and people are willing to share their views, even if they're contradictory at times with others. And I think that's how you get to the best result. But it's been a lot of fun for me to be down here for the first time.
You were brought in part because of your background with revenue generation at NASCAR and the way that you have to sell sponsorships and things like that. Almost everything we've talked about here has been about finding more revenue, whether that's expanding the NCAA tournament, possibly expanding the CFP. We've talked about the Duke Amazon deal somewhat. Yeah. Everything, it seems like, for ADs and athletic departments and even coaches, how do we generate more revenue? How do we get more of that revenue into the roster? It seems like the entire job would be consumed with revenue generation.
It is a critical component. It's no doubt that college sports is having to adopt some of the practices that professional sports have already polished and matured over time. And we're going to need to do that because there's no doubt that the cost of supporting collegiate athletics is continuing to rise. I mean, there's somewhat of an irrational arms race in the player market, and that's just part of the landscape now, and we have to adjust to it. I know there's some that say, hey, I'd like to go back to how we did it in the 80s and 90s, but that's not the way it works. There's probably businesses that didn't want the internet to come online because it disrupted how they used to operate. You have to adapt. And so that's really what we're looking at. And we're no different than all the other schools. We're all trying to figure out different ways to support our programs. Some of it can be on a macro level. Some of it you look at your own particular situation and figure out in Chapel Hill, how can we maximize revenues to support our program? That said, although that has become a big part of any athletic director's job, it's still not the primary role. And the thing that has been most refreshing and reaffirming to me since coming on board is most of our time is still spent on making sure we're serving the student athletes and the coaches and making sure that we're taking young kids who come from high school or on their first venture often of being away from home, getting acclimated to classes, making sure they have the academic support and mental health support. We're preparing them for their next step. That still consumes probably 80 to 90% of an athletic department's time. Now the headlines become about this revenue opportunity, or, we bring the Savannah Bananas to Chapel Hill. That helps both the economic impact in Chapel Hill, but it also generates more revenue that we can funnel back into the athletic department.
There's a lot of schools out there probably that are just fine funneling everything into football and men's college basketball. But Carolina is special because it has all these other sports that compete and win at the highest level, sometimes even better than certainly football and in some cases basketball. How do you balance that?
So that is probably one of our biggest challenges. And listen, we are very blessed in the sense that we've had so much success across the board. We take a lot of pride in having 28 sports, having broad-based programs. It's part of our DNA. When I was growing up, it was, women's soccer and Anston and Karen Sheltman field hockey and Willie Scroggs and men's lacrosse. And we've continued that tradition of excellence. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was like, well, they felt like their season, at least of collegiate athletics at their school, was winding down. And I started thinking about it. Well, we have women's tennis, who's the 5 seed, they're still alive. Women's lacrosse, the 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, they're still alive. Men's lacrosse is the 3 seed, they're still alive. Men's baseball is number 2 in the country. Our women's golf is 12, still going in the NCAA tournament, and men's golf is 9, still going in the NCAA tournament. So for us, it feels like we have a whole nother summer season.
Yeah.
And that's important to who we are, and it allows us to be able to give opportunities to more student athletes than most schools. We're almost 750 student athletes. But on the flip side, it does make it more difficult for us to figure out how to fund and make sure that we can provide the resources for all of those sports. A lot of schools have 19, 20, 21 sports. We have 28, and we're blessed in the sense that most of them have national championship aspirations for a good reason. A lot of them have won national championships. And so that really is a balancing act for us right now. And we've got to figure out how we maintain that in the current landscape, because an interesting note, I think you guys are familiar, and some of your audience may be familiar with the House settlement that said, hey, there's a rev share cap of $20.5 million. Strangely to me, it wasn't tied to the number of sports. So whether you have 17 sports or 28 sports, you have the same cap. And I actually think that's not probably the best way to do it, because it's almost a disincentive for some schools to have more sports. And I think in a day and age where we all want to lean into these sports that are thriving at the youth level, volleyball, softball, we should actually be figuring out a way to generate more interest in having schools add sports.
And we've seen schools cut sports. Right. You guys have promised not to do that. Is that a promise you can make for a decade, or is that a promise you can make for a couple of years?
I mean, I think our intent is to continue to maintain. I'm not sure what the past history, but I know it's been, again, you get back to, it is really important to who we are and our identity to have broad-based sports. And so that's the goal, and we'll continue to push to make sure that happens to the best of our ability.
You get hired last year, or hiring is announced, and the school's in the middle of this grand experiment. Bill Belichick, the greatest NFL coach, maybe of all time, coming to college. And it's this amazing story, and it's gone on a lot of roads since, ups and downs. How do you guys evaluate that going forward? Because on one hand, it's understandable to be patient with somebody who's never coached at college. But on the other hand, we have programs all around the country doing these massive turnarounds. And Indiana kind of broke everybody's brain. So you got a 4-8 season and a really tough schedule ahead.
I think you have to step back. First of all, I've been really fortunate. I've really enjoyed working with Coach Belichick. I mean, when you get to see him operate on a day-to-day basis, he is maniacally focused on the details. And he also cares very deeply for the kids. He is trying to figure out how to make them better, how to reach their potential. That's why he was so successful in the pros. And so you actually can see, when you watch him operate, you see how that works and how it translated to such success at the professional level. But there's no doubt that whenever you have a program turn, leadership change, there is an adjustment period and adaptation. Mm-hmm. I think the general rule is, you see, it takes a couple years for schools, when they have a leadership change, particularly in the football space, because of the number of kids on the team. We've got 105, that they need to come in and put their stamp, make sure they bring in players that are suitable for their system. And so I think that's where we're looking at. I think we're optimistic where we're going. I like the way that they're trying to build it. We understand we're in a performance-based sport. Coach Belichick would be the first to say that, but we feel like we're on the right trajectory. And we need to continue to show what Coach Belichick continually refers to as continuous improvement.
Last year there was so much excitement, and you guys sold out season tickets, and there was this buzz, and that was a lot of what you were looking for when you hired Coach Belichick. How do you balance that off the field, generating revenue, people are excited, national relevance, versus what's happening on the field, wins and losses?
At the end of the day, we want to win. I mean, that's why you put these programs out there. And so that's the ultimate goal when you're talking about the on-field performance. And so obviously last year we didn't get enough wins. We didn't get as many wins as we'd like. Obviously had a couple fumbles on the goal line there that turn a few of those games, but that's sports, and we've got to figure out a way to get on the right end of that. But I don't think that wins and losses are the sole barometer, particularly in college sports. And so, you want to see the improvement, as I mentioned, as we go through the season. And I'm confident we'll do that. And they're building a program, and I think you have to give coaches time to be able to do that.
We've reported on a variety of issues the football program has faced, and things like culture can be hard to define, but then there's court records and the driving from last season. We found there's disproportionate rates of speeding and reckless driving, and then some of that pattern has continued into this season, and then parking on campus on handicap spots. We got your guys' statement. I think it's some ways the answer is obvious, right? You shouldn't do these things. But what are you guys doing to kind of educate and try to stop this kind of behavior going forward?
Sure. I think when you have almost 750 student athletes, you provide general training awareness to all of them. And that's something that we do as just part of the normal integration process when our student athletes come on board. Obviously, identified some issues that occurred in the football program last year. Sat with Coach Belichick. I feel comfortable about some of the steps that they've taken internally to try to provide new disciplinary structures, to bring in resources, and we'll continue to work on it because we expect our players to represent the university. They're not just representing themselves for the football program. They've got a broader obligation to represent the university. And so we'll continue to educate and make sure that hopefully we take the right steps to minimize that type of behavior.
One of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, in this era, do kids even have to go to class? Do they even have to follow any of the rules? And we've heard this spring that Coach Belichick is checking class attendance himself. I wonder, in these rev share contracts and these other deals, are there kind of morals clauses about, if you don't follow these rules, we see in the pros, you get fined. How much of that pro structure has come to college athletics?
So we put a lot of emphasis on class attendance and class performance, and that's just who we are. I think each school does it differently. That's something that's important to us. I've watched both Coach Belichick and actually now Coach Malone. When they're recruiting, they're not just looking for talent on the court or on the field. There's an assessment of, can this particular student athlete thrive and survive in our academic setting? And I think that's something that we take pride in and will be important to us. Doesn't mean that you'll have a perfect record across the board, but I went to our academic awards luncheon about a month ago. There were 130 students graduating, and there were several hundred who had gotten awards for being on honor roll for national academics. And I was blown away by some of the student athletes that got up on stage to speak about their experience, and they brought a professor that had had a profound impact on them. And so that's still part of who we are. And I will tell you, one of my favorite moments this year was I was having a conversation with Coach Belichick. I think it was on a Monday. And I said, what are you doing tomorrow morning? He's like, oh, I'm getting up. And he had this just wry smile on his face. He's like, I'm going to go class check, which what that meant is he was going to go stand outside of a class at 10 to 8. He wasn't going to go inside because didn't want to interfere with the professor. Was going to stand outside with a clipboard, and he knew that there were 8 football players that were supposed to be in that class, and he was going to check off. And he took a lot of pride in doing that to show them, hey, it's not just important to university, it's important to the football program that you go to class. I don't know what the attendance rate was for that. I do know the next day there was 100% attendance across the board. And the other great thing about it is he told me that some other student athletes from other sports came up and said, hey, did our coach tell you to check as well? And he goes, yes, they did. And so, but it was, to me, that's a great message to send. And it's something that we do have to recognize, that we're not professional sports. And the academic component is still important. And if you look at our 750 student athletes, most of them are not going to continue on to play professionally, or that's not going to be how they generate if not their career going forward. And so the degree, and that is very important. That's why we're so proud that there were 130 of them go across the stage on commencement last week.
I have heard that Belichick personally went and woke up a kid at his apartment who was late. So it's great to see he's like actually getting on boots on the ground like that. I'm glad you lightened the mood a little bit, because this is an exciting time for Carolina. And for you hired a basketball coach. I mean, that's, athletic directors in a lot of ways are judged by their most high profile hires. And this process was really interesting where we got the big names out there, Dusty May, Tommy Lloyd, Billy Donovan, but then here he is right under your nose, Mike Malone. How close were you to actually trying to hire those other guys? And when did you kind of flip it to Mike Malone's here the whole time?
Yeah, so interestingly, we actually didn't flip it, and we would view Malone as one of the big names, considering that he has won.
fair.
He's the only one that had won an NBA
Unexpected name
championship.
is probably the way
So,
to put it.
yeah, but what was interesting, I think it was unexpected to the outside, and I think we talked about this in the press conference, is that we were really pleased with how the process unfolded. You always try to learn from past searches. And so we took things from the Belichick search. We took things from other areas. How could we improve that process? And we set up a structure. We had an executive search committee, had an advisory group, had a kind of a Coach Williams, Coach Fogler, Kenny Smith. We were consulting with all those and making sure we were leveraging all this talent that we have under the Carolina umbrella, particularly in the basketball space. And we each kind of came up with our list of coaches, and Coach Malone was in our tier one, which was a very small list. And he was actually the first coach that I contacted. And Pat Sullivan had given me his number, and I reached out to him, and we had about an hour and a half conversation. You realize he's a basketball encyclopedia and knows everything about Carolina basketball just from his history. And he had said to me at the end, he said, Steve, when I got the phone call and when Sully reached out to me, I thought this was a courtesy call. I said, it wasn't on my radar screen to contemplate coming back to the college space. He had been at 3 different stops in the collegiate space before he shifted to the NBA. And he said, this has given me something to think about. He said, my focus really has been on these different opportunities that he has in the NBA space to return to coaching. And so, because he kind of said, hey, he unfortunately didn't say, hey, I'm all in, let's do it right now. That I've given him grief, because that would have saved us all a lot of angst. You guys wouldn't have had anything to write about for the next 10 days, though, about what's going on. And so, after that conversation, we did have discussions and did have some interaction with some other coaches, but it wasn't a lot. And a lot of the reports were out there about us talking to this coach. A lot of those were inaccurate. Now, I'll tell you where I take pride is that actually we didn't have leaks on our side. There was a cohesive group, and we kept it together, which is why when Malone was announced, a lot of people were surprised. And they said, well, he wasn't on my list. And I kind of smiled at that, because he was actually on our list the entire time.
Yeah, like, no kidding. We actually have the real list.
Yeah, and so
sorry, media.
So I think we're thrilled. We think his character, integrity, what he stands for, his coaching ability, he checked all of the boxes. And it was interesting. Coach Williams asked me, I think in our first discussion, he said, it would be beneficial if you could lay out what's most important for you on the list of criteria, and what are the must-haves for a coach. So we sat and I talked about that with Coach Williams, obviously got his input, because who better to help guide you on that. And Malone just checked every single one of them. And I think you guys saw that during his press conference. I mean, now we also laughed afterwards that it was great to win the press conference, but that's not the ultimate goal. You got to win on the court. And so we'll hopefully have some success. We put him behind the 8 ball a little bit. We had the press conference. I think you guys were there on a Tuesday, and then said, okay, you need to walk straight down the hall, go into the war room, because the portal opened 12 hours ago, and it really opened 2 weeks ago, but you now have to go construct a complete roster. So we're pretty happy with what he's been able to accomplish, but really more excited to see what he does next year.
I was going to ask about that first team. Obviously, the expectation is for Carolina basketball to be a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament and to be among the top teams in the ACC. It's hard to do that in your first year when you walking in with a roster that's in flux. How do you feel like that roster's come together, and how do you feel like you'll be competitive this year?
I think we're always going to set our goals and objectives in basketball at the highest level. I mean, that's just who we are, and that's what the success breeds expectations, and we recognize that. It was interesting to me during the search process, a lot of the really smart folks who are important stakeholders in UNC all said the same thing. They were like, hey, this is a decade-long decision. Don't worry as much about what happens in the first year. Let's make sure that we get somebody who fits the university, who represents us well, and can have overall long-term success. Then the minute that we hired him, it switched to, we got to figure out how to get the right roster, because this first year is critically important. We have to have a fast start out of the gate. So, and that's UNC. That's why we like being part of this program, because the expectations are high, and I think most of us who are in this space and have a competitive side to us want those to be the expectations. So we'll see how it plays out.
I wanted to ask about the Duke deal with Amazon. Obviously, gotten a lot of attention, and I think I've talked to other ADs who say, well, wait a second, if they can do that, what can we do? Carolina basketball at least has a brand that would be able to probably carry it. I'm not sure many other teams in the league could do that, but when you look at the deal that they were able to cut, do you start looking at what can we do in this space?
We were already exploring different options to get back to your initial revenue question,
right,
because you want to figure out how you can maximize the value of your program and generate enough revenue to support these rising costs. And so that's something that's been on our radar screen. I know that, Duke and Nina did a nice job putting something together and leveraging what their brand was. So we'll continue to explore different ways that we can do creative things that will help the university, help our basketball program, and also give opportunities for our student athletes. Some of the most incredible experiences for our basketball players is when they get to go as a team to a different location that they've never traveled to. Sometimes we forget that these are still, a lot of them are still 17 and 18-year-old kids. And I was with the team when we were in Florida over Thanksgiving, and just watching them all spend Thanksgiving together and have dinner and, be on the water. They had this energy that maybe some of the jaded older folks like us might not have, but this was new. And so that's part of what we're doing, is looking at how can we find new things to do, which is one of the reasons we're going to Ireland.
Right.
We've got our football team playing in Dublin. We have our women's soccer team going over there as well, playing a professional team. I watched the women's soccer players all start cheering and get excited when they heard they were going to get to go to Ireland to play a game. So that's all part and parcel of what we're looking at.
Couldn't get the golf team over there.
If you look at where the golf team has played, which I think is Hawaii and some other places, I think they've had some fairly decent opportunities. That I don't think feel like they're getting shortchanged there.
I'm amazed at how far we've gone in this interview and this week so far with barely talking about conference realignment. And remember a couple of years ago here, that was the story, right? You're in these rooms, so's Clemson, so's Florida State. It's documented what UNC has explored as far as the future. Where are we at with that? Like, where's Carolina in 5 years?
That's hard to say. I'm not sure that I'm going to try to use a crystal ball, because I think if we had all done that 5 years ago, I don't think anybody would have predicted where we are right now.
We have all these cameras doing
with
this.
NIL and stuff. So, I think our focus right now is we've got short-term goals and long-term goals, and they're always around student-athlete success on and off the field. So we've got to figure out where we can best fulfill those goals. Right now, I think we're really excited about the direction the ACC is going. I think Commissioner Phillips has shown that we're going to be entrepreneurial and innovative, and a lot of the discussion here has been about how we continue to elevate the ACC. And you look at the number of national championships that the ACC has every year, that suits us very well because of our broad-based sports. And there's a focus on women's sports, there's a focus on Olympic sports, and obviously men's basketball, women's basketball, and football tend to get a lot of the headlines, but for us it's much broader than that, and I think the ACC is doing a great job to continue to support all of our programs.
I've got one more for you. Obviously, Carolina North, they're talking about developing that today, I think, at the Board of Trustees. The basketball arena part of that has been put on hiatus. Can you give any update as to where you stand on that issue? And we've talked a lot about revenue generation. A lot of the conversation around Carolina North or a new arena is because you need the men's basketball program to generate more revenue.
I think we'll continue to value all of that, but from my seat, that pause has happened, and we have continued to focus on what's right in front of us, which is, integrating Coach Malone into the program, making sure he has a staff and a roster. I knew Carolina North is going forward. There's some incredible plans out there, and that's for university-based, but for right now, the arena discussion really has been put on hold while we're trying to address some of the other issues that are in front of us.
Well, you've only been here a year, and it probably feels like you've been here with a year on the couch with us. You got the Jordan game down, though, I see. So Steve Newmark fitting right in at Carolina.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.